when we're thinking about digital transformation, for us, it's inextricable from diversity and inclusion and our efforts,
Mhm.
because for us, diversity and inclusion is part of what leads to the best innovation.
Welcome to the Rozy Effect show, where I give you the keys to lead digital transformation. I'm your host, Rozy Amponsa. If you can't tell, I am so excited about today's guest, Elisa Miller-Out. Not only is she an experienced tech entrepreneur and investor, she leads with diverse women to drive technology transformation. Let's get right into it. Lisa, I am so grateful to see you again. Last I saw you was at Cornell, and it's just grateful to see you, all that you've been working on. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you because you are a boss in tech. You've always been, and it would be pretty dope. So let's get right into it. So, Elisa, share with me, what is an unconventional strategy that you've applied that did surprisingly well?
Absolutely. So, and I'll start by, should I start with my intro as well, maybe, just so you
Please
have
give
that
me a
too?
bit of what Elisa has been up to the last few years.
Great. Okay, great. Well, I will start with my intro. So, hi, I'm Elisa Miller-Out. I'm the managing partner and co founder of Chloe Capital, which is a seed stage venture capital firm focused on investing in women all across the US. We invest with both a gender and diversity lens in seed stage companies. Um, I would love to also address your question about sort of an unconventional strategy I've applied, because I think this applies directly to the work we do at Chloe Capital. So, we started out by doing things in a really unconventional way, which is to do this investing with a gender and diversity lens, a space that, while it's, in the news a little more these days, this is something that we've been leading the way in for the last several years. And this has been our work around this sort of equity, diversity, and inclusion has been core to our mission at Chloe Capital from day one when we were founded back in 2017. So at the time when we started, this was very unconventional in that the current stats you may know about in the venture capital industry are that about 2% of women receive venture capital funding, and it's less than 1% if you're a woman of color. So these numbers, as
Don't
we know,
remind
are
me.
completely unacceptable, and also are indicative of what is being overlooked, but is an incredible opportunity, right? So at Chloe Capital, we saw that as an incredible opportunity. And from years and my background as a tech entrepreneur and being in this industry, I saw firsthand the number of amazing, talented founders out there who were consistently being underestimated and overlooked by the current systems in place. So we founded Chloe Capital with the goal of both making an impact and making a difference in this space and moving that number from 1% and 2% up to 50% where it should be. But also we did this as a way to make bigger financial returns for our investors, because the data
Absolutely.
shows over and over again that when you do invest in women of all colors, you actually see greater results, right?
Yes.
And lots of folks, when we were getting started, said that we wouldn't have a pipeline, if we chose this gender and diversity lens strategy, that we would not see enough of a pipeline of talent, right? And that we really needed to be investing in white men as well, right? If we wanted to really make a if we really wanted to be able to build out a portfolio of high growth tech startups that had venture capital level returns. But I think at this point, with our track record with Chloe Capital, in just 2.5 years or so, we've been able to prove the naysayers wrong, in that we've already built up a pipeline of over 3,000 companies.
Yes.
We've already
I've been
built,
following.
exactly. So we've got a really robust pipeline of incredibly diverse talent that we've been investing in across our whole national tour, which is the Invest in Women tour. And we're so excited about the impact we've already been able to have and how we can continue to deepen our work in the coming years.
You hit the nail right on its head. And we're going to talk a bit more when we get into people, because even on your board with a group of women from different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, different women of color that are really represented. We'll get into that. Let's talk a bit more about how an organization like yourself, we're looking at the companies that you've been able to lead and mentor in growth. How are they able to define or measure success when it comes to really identifying that digital transformation?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So, when we're thinking about digital transformation, for us, it's inextricable from diversity and inclusion and our efforts, because for us, diversity and inclusion is part of what
Mhm.
leads to the best innovation, right? It's having, so
Mm.
for us, it's people creating these technological innovations to solve the problems in the
Ooh.
world. So for us, it's about having the right people at the table building the innovations of the
Yeah.
future. And so
Yes.
our philosophy at Chloe is we got to solve for equity, diversity, and inclusion first, and then we can go out and solve the other bigger problems in the world, because then we'll have a diverse group of folks at the table solving those problems together in a way that can benefit everyone. And I'll just give one example here too, because so for example, in the auto industry, there was a scandal a while back with crash test dummies, because the crash test dummies originally that were created were designed to be male bodies. So the crash test dummies were shaped
Mhm.
like a, typical standard size sort of male body. And they didn't have any female engineers in the room. So when they did all this safety
Come on.
testing, they realized
Come
that
on.
these dummies, while the cars were tested for safety according to a typical male body, they weren't tested for safety for a female body, right? Or a small, so which is typically in many cases, not always, but often smaller, right, in a different frame than a male body. So they only tested with this certain body type for the crash test
Mm.
dummies. As a
Mm.
result, there were many people who were injured in car accidents as a result, because the cars weren't designed to keep people of all different types safe. Now, if they had just had even one woman engineer in the room who might have said, "Hey, I saw that safety
Mm.
test happening and I saw that I would have died in that car accident if that had been my body in this car," right? So that's the kind of example where, like, having the right different voices at the
Yeah.
table and having diversity
Yeah.
as when you're trying to solve problems and trying to build products, um, it's so critical that you have these different voices at the table. Otherwise, you end up making critical mistakes that can, in some cases, cost lives. In other cases, that can be much smaller things, but that still cause massive errors. Like, there was a whole scandal where literally
Oh
the
yeah.
water fountains that you put your hands underneath when you're washing your hands and stuff, and you have these sensors, right, that automatically detect your hands when you put them, motion sensors. They were designed, but they didn't have
I
black
saw that
engineers in the
one.
room, so they
Yeah.
didn't design them to actually work
Interesting.
with darker skin tones. So again,
Nope.
major product flaw here, that
Didn't
suddenly this,
exist. Didn't
technology just
exist.
doesn't work for a whole huge
Oh my
part of the
goodness.
population. And it's just because they didn't have the right voices in the room. So how are we going to solve the big problems, like climate change, right? Like poverty, all these other major problems that our world faces, right?
Mhm.
How do we solve them if we don't have diverse voices at the table solving them? So to us, that's what makes things successful, is when you have the right voices at the table building those innovations together.
And you hit on the value of focusing on building equity at the table first before looking at that revenue returns, right? But that's a bit flipped, as you said, when you were initiating this, the industry was like, "What are you doing? Get some white men in there." How are you positioned to now educate the white men that are leading organization, that are driving, to see that there is value in your approach and the returns are actually greater? What does that conversation, or what does that advice look like for leadership?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's our perspective that, again, this movement really does need to be inclusive of, when we say all voices, we really do mean all voices, right? So just as the problems that women have faced, like the Me Too movement, that's not just a women's problem, it's a male problem, right? So men need to step up and help solve that problem as well. In Chloe Capital, we call them our man ambassadors, right? Some wonderful men who have stepped up to help lead the way in this space in different ways, right? Who have stepped up to either invest with us, or to sponsor our programs or help us in this movement and journey in different ways, right? And same way that I think a lot of the racial issues, right, are not just problems of people of color, they're problems that have been
No.
perpetuated by structural and systemic systems that have been put in place by white people through many years, right? Hundreds of years of this. So it's white
Oh
people's
man, this
problems
is
to help
amazing.
dismantle these structures. It's not just black people's problem to dismantle all of these structures, or even to educate
Hmm.
us about how to dismantle them.
You've hit it
Exactly.
right on there.
So,
You've hit it right on
so,
there.
so these are all things that we need to be, working collaboratively to solve these problems together. I don't think that white people should try to solve for racism
No,
completely in isolation. I think they
no.
should be listening to black voices in the process and understanding and educating themselves about this process. But I do think they have a very strong role to play in it, just as I feel feel like men have a very strong role to play in equity for women as well.
And what I value is you actually creating that specificity, right? Men in terms of being an ally to women. When we talk about the impacts of Black voices in corporate spaces, and your organization and the way you're speaking, you're very specific. It's not a cluster of this is an issue, so let's go solve it. There are key issues that each one has its element that, you know, we need to focus on to solve it, and you're hitting it on, and I very much appreciate that. Very, very valuable. So let's look at navigating the new normal, because at the end of the day, the pandemic hit, and either you were changing or the pandemic would have changed for you. How should leadership position themselves to be able to navigate uncertainty and position themselves to be leading when we talk about moving forward in this new normal?
Absolutely. This is a question that's on all of our minds right now, obviously, right? I mean, we went from a place where, you know, everything seemed to be going somewhat okay in terms of, you know, our general society, to literally this pandemic, you know, wreaking havoc across the entire globe. So, in terms of Chloe Capital and how we've responded to this and how, you know, we've worked with our companies as well, is, you know, starting just by taking this day by day, of course, right? Things are changing and shifting constantly. We have to be on top of all these different rules and regulations that are coming by on the state level, on the federal level, you know, and kind of staying on top of that to see how we should be responding, both in our businesses as well as, you know, in society, and how we're supposed to be interacting in the world. We we had a huge impact on our programs when the pandemic hit, because we were at Chloe, we were building this movement, and a lot of our community that we were building was in-person programs and events. We also do all of our investment activity virtually, and we already had sort of a national network and even a global network. So that none of that changed for us. We were already used to working virtually. We're used to investing virtually, used to doing our portfolio management virtually. So we were really well prepared to address those parts of the pandemic. However, our community programs and our events that happened in different cities, we did love to come together with big groups of people, sometimes hundreds of people at once, to support these women founders in their journeys. And we did find that, of course, the pandemic certainly interrupted that. That said, being tech entrepreneurs and being folks who are used to just pivoting daily and iterating daily on things, we were able to very quickly pivot our movement to a virtual environment. And we did just create our program. Our most recent program was supposed to be in Charlotte, and instead we completed that program completely virtually.
Oh, wow.
We did not actually have to skip a beat in terms of our mission, because we knew how important it was now more than ever to continue deploying capital to women of all colors. We wanted to continue with that mission, and we wanted to continue to drive that forward. So we didn't postpone our program, and we kept everything right on time, but we did have to scramble to work around the clock with our incredible team, Kate, Meineko, Erica, and then our incredible extended team that worked on this project. Everyone worked around the clock to basically completely convert what had been an in-person program to a virtual 24-hour experience. And it was pretty incredible. We still managed to deploy about $275,000 to women founders right on the spot. And actually, with the trilogy of programs we did with ECMC Foundation as our partner, we deployed over 1.25 million in capital just over the last 6 months. Through programs just like this. And not only that, I was pleased that we were still able to truly capture the mission behind it, because it was not just about the investments from Chloe or ECMC Foundation, but all the other investors that we could bring to the table. And even in our virtual program, we were still able to create those connections between the founders and the other co-investors that we brought to the room, so that we actually had an investor, one of our ambassadors that I was mentioning earlier, Paul Singh, who stepped up to the table, and he invested in one of the female founders on the spot, made another impact investment for $25,000 right there on the moment.
It's needed
in one of these companies, and that was all happened in a virtual environment. So again, you know, we were able to still really make this super effective, meet our mission, and have a role for amazing ambassadors like that, who really step up and don't just want to help out with words, but want to help out with capital, which is probably one of the most important ways our allies can help in this movement. So we're so happy that program was so effective, despite having to make all the last minute changes. Always have a plan A, B, and C, and maybe D, E, and F if you have to. And that's what we've had to do.
Made all there.
right? So because we knew that, like, okay, well, we know that this might be the situation, but we might have to do this or we might have to do that. And we have to do the same thing with our portfolio companies in terms of hope for the best, and that's maybe your plan A, but then you have to plan for the worst, which might be your plan C, D, E, and F. And when you're dealing with uncertainty, you just have to have backup plans. And we did that
Mm.
with our virtual program, and it really paid off.
So what did that backup for the virtual space look like?
It just looked like, every different section of the event, we would say, okay, so this segment, it could work well if we do it this way, but if this happens, we're going to have to figure something else out, right? So we would have sort of these, it was like little things as well as bigger things. On the big scale, it was things like saying, okay, are we going to be able to do this in person? Are we going to be able to do it hybrid, virtual, in person? Are we going to have to go entirely virtual? Because at the time when we were planning this, we actually didn't know. At that point, not everything had shut down yet, and the
Yeah, right.
lockdown hadn't happened yet. So we
Hmm.
didn't know exactly at first how society was going to respond. It wasn't clear yet whether there would be full lockdowns in Charlotte, whether we would be able to travel or not. There were all these different questions that were completely up in the air at the beginning. So at first it was like, okay, well, plan A is maybe we still go to Charlotte. Plan B is maybe we do it. Maybe some of us go to Charlotte, but not all of us. Or maybe, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? And plan
yeah.
C is, okay, we move to completely virtual. So those were some of the big examples. And then we had little examples throughout the event as well when we were just dealing with all the technical aspects of Zoom and having to say, okay, well, what if this happens? What if one of the people Zoom bombs us, during the webinar? What if someone puts something really horrible in the chat? How do we deal
Yeah,
with that? Kind of
yeah.
trying to plan for all these different scenarios and then have
Mhm,
backups
mhm.
for each. So those were the
Oh,
kinds
that's
of things.
amazing. And congratulations. I saw the write up on that. So congratulations absolutely on a successful programming, completely virtual. And it's almost like you had the necessary pieces in place and the opportunity just presented itself, and the way that you guys put it together was pretty amazing. But I love how at the end of the day there's a sense of people driving Chloe Capital. And so let's go back into people and let's talk about how leadership can identify the current state of their people, really identify those key individuals that are going to lead that transformation. What does that look like? Because it seems like that is the foundation of driving Chloe Capital into success. Really, women with that same vision, different people of color. Tell me about people.
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, it is certainly important to have, a diverse team at the helm and a diverse group of advisors, as well as a diverse portfolio. And, we have been working on our diversity across all of those fronts, and we've been leaders in that space, but we will continue to do more and do better because we are always iterating and trying to get better in this. So right
Mhm,
now, about
mhm.
50% of the women who have gone through our programs are women of color, which when you compare
Yes.
to the less than 1% in the industry as a whole, I think we're doing pretty well. But obviously, we could do even better, right? And then,
Please.
but that said, when you asked this question, I was also thinking about the technology and digital transformation side of things too, right? So how do we look at workforce and some of these issues? And since we just did this program with ECMC Foundation, we were looking a lot at solutions in the future of work and education. So we came across a number of companies that were innovating in this space. So one of
Mm.
our recent investments was actually a company called Riff Analytics that does a remote work platform that actually has data that goes into conversations like this that we're having remotely, but we would have a whole data dashboard to see different kinds of aspects of the conversation. And the idea is to improve teamwork and actually improve diversity and inclusion as well, because the idea is that there sometimes is bias that happens in discussions and in meetings, and this actually helps uncover some of those unconscious bias in terms of seeing which voices maybe aren't being heard, who's being
Yes. Yes.
interrupted often, who's not getting a chance to speak in meetings, things like that. So it actually is able to uncover some of that. So that's another way to look at this is, what
Wow.
kinds of ways are women innovating in this space to create
Oh
kinds of
man.
solutions?
And especially with our virtual working spaces, such a solution will really allow for all team members to be present, to be aware, to have their voices heard, or at least have leadership be have exposure to the reality of the state of people, and you know what I mean, how they're really running different responsibilities of the business.
Yeah.
Pretty dope.
Yeah, and actually, I was going to say, Rosie, one more thing on this too, because I think this does tie to the, to the question around people too. We've also seen a lot of solutions in the recruiting space as well,
Mhm.
and this is something we've looked at actively too. And one of our companies that we invested in on the tour also is a company that's very relevant to both the pandemic as well as sort of the recruiting space. It's in the healthcare staffing space. It's a company called Provider Pool, and it's founded by Jana Westbrook, a founder of color based in the St. Louis, Missouri area. She was a nurse and also went to a leadership role in the nursing profession and saw firsthand the problems that senior homes were facing when staffing nurses and different healthcare providers. Then with the pandemic, as you can imagine, this problem became even more severe, right? As healthcare staffing became, a primary topic of concern for hospitals, senior homes, and healthcare institutions all across the country. So she's been very rapidly working to scale this company so that she can provide a better technical solution that allows for better matching and recruiting and staffing for healthcare providers.
Oh,
And
wow.
there's been incredible demand for her services. But not only that, her team and her, and the extended folks who are using her platform have been literally on the front lines of this crisis throughout this entire time. So it has been remarkable to see how she's been able to grow and scale this platform during these very challenging times, but times when the need is so great. So we're really excited to support founders like her. She just joined Techstars and is now
Oh,
continuing to
wow.
grow and scale her company.
That is
And we're
amazing.
really excited to be on the journey with founders like her.
This is a solution that I can personally relate to because my mom works in a senior living home. And those were one of the key issues we're discussing. As you realize, the pandemic really, it impacted areas like that, and being able to find the right staffing. This is a much needed solution in the current space. So I am so grateful for this woman. Yes. And a person of color too. Go girl.
Yeah, she's awesome.
So let's delve a bit more into diversity, because I know Chloe Capital is really trying to shift the narrative when it comes to the tiny percentage of women that get investing, let alone Black women who get basically nothing, right? What does it mean when we talk about the impact of diversity on digital transformation for an executive leader looking to do their transformation? What is the value to them, so that they need to really go from the conversation in we are looking to do diversity and inclusion to the implementation and action for the value of the business?
This is a great question. And it's one that, we're looking at across all areas of our organization as well. And I think it's one that most leaders are grappling with in one way or the other right now. It's important to us that this is not just a time when, because diversity and inclusion is in the media, we need to, make a statement or a press release. Sure. It's a great time to, of course, raise our voices. Of course, that's a part of it. But what's even more important is the action to back that up, right? So we've already been taking those actions as leaders in this space for years. However, as I mentioned, we can still do so much more. So one of the things we're looking at right now is, since so much of the problems we've had with equity and diversity and inclusion in our society are structural and systemic problems, we need to look at now, how do we find anti-racist solutions that are also systemic? So how do we look at making anti-racism systemic and structural, and not just paying lip service to it, right? So,
Mm.
so what that means is looking across
Mhm.
all different processes across your organization and seeing. So, one thing that I was inspired by, as an example, recently is Illumin Capital, which is a organization that Chloe was in conversations with recently. Is a group that invests in funds, right? They act as like a fund of funds. So it's a fund that invests in other
Ones,
VC fund
right.
managers. I know it's kind of meta, but it's it's a thing. So what they do is they actually have anti-bias training that they go through with the fund managers that they invest in. So it's literally part of their
Wow.
investment process to build those structures in, so that the fund managers are looking at their screening processes for portfolio companies in a way that eliminates some of the common biases that they're seeing in the industry. They've done research in conjunction with Stanford on this
Mhm.
topic and been able to uncover some of the systemic bias that's in the system. And they've looked at this bias at a high level, which is in the institutional capital space, which is really critical, because the institutional capital space is where the big pools of capital are. Those are the big pools of capital that have been very hard to access for women and people of color up until now. And that's why those numbers that we see are so low. So they've actually, through their studies at Illumin Capital, they were able to uncover some of the conscious and unconscious bias at that level, at the institutional level, and then also embed solutions to it in their processes, right? So we're inspired by things like that, seeing ways that people have embedded this in their processes. Another way to do this is through things like B Corp certification.
Yes,
So in some of my former companies, I was a leader in the B Corp movement, and we're now looking into getting Chloe Capital, which is a newer entity, also going into the B Corp certification process with that. Yeah. But that's another way that we can go through and actually measure what we're doing across different areas, again, to systematize and create structures, not just around anti-bias and diversity and inclusion, which is a big part of the B Corp assessment, but also other areas too, sustainability and other areas of impact and governance. So it allows you to look at your metrics holistically across your company. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at, but these are ways to basically walk the walk and not just talk about it, but actually, actually look at how do you change how do you work on systems change, and how do you build structural anti-racism into your systems. So these are things we're inspired by and that we're looking at in terms of ways we can even deepen the work that we already do at Chloe Capital.
Wow. So we basically debunked this theory of if only we could find more people of color, more Black women who are skilled in X, Y, and Z, then maybe our workforce would change. You basically created a specific structure that leadership and organizations can look at and implementing in every single process of their output, whether it's a product to the end consumer, that really allows for them to see and implement impact on bringing in people of color or breaking down biases. And you've shown that to leadership. So that theory, basically, we've debunked it.
Debunked right here. I love it. And just as one more call to action, because I know we need to wrap up soon too.
Yes, we do.
But I do want to address that. I think there is a role that right now, especially seeing the institutional capital, so folks who are in charge of endowments, pension funds, at large foundations, large universities, large government organizations, all of these places, as well as large corporate entities. Those are the big pools of investment capital out there right now. And until we see those pools of capital change in terms of their structure, we won't see the rest of the kind of change that we need to see in this world to truly create the innovations of the future with a diverse group of folks at the table, building those innovations together to really create a thriving society for all of us. So our call to action is, if you're someone in the institutional space and you're looking to go on this journey with equity, diversity, and inclusion, we welcome the chance to partner with you and help on that journey. We've been leaders in this space. We can help with how to take that journey and how to take those next steps.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to chat with you. Words of wisdom. Very much appreciate what you do in the Chloe Capital. I can't wait to just hear the next big thing that comes out. I very much appreciate this time, Elisa. And if anything, I'll keep you updated. Is there any final words that you'd want to share with the audience?
Thank you so much, Rozy, for having me on the show here. Really thrilled with the work you're doing in the space as well, and hope you can continue to innovate as well in this, as well as in all of your other ventures, as I know you will continue to do. And look forward to staying in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Elisa. I very much appreciate this. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Bye. All right, you heard it here, leaders. When it comes to turning conversation into action, Elisa, a managing partner at Chloe Capital, is calling on leaders within institutional capital spaces to join the journey with equity, diversity investments. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the Rozy Effect show. If you haven't already, as you know, don't walk, run to the rozyeffect.com and subscribe. That is TheRozyEffect.com and subscribe to get exclusive insights from visionaries leading the charge in digital transformation, especially in our era of digital disruption. Until next time, I'm your host, Rozy Amponsa.